looking at who they chose as presenters for this conference, it's always interesting to see the subject matter experts that are drawn to us. And Carol, I was wondering, what would make a great presenter to discuss a case about A.P.S. fraud?
What would make a good presenter? I'd say someone with over 28 years working with victims of exploitation.
Okay.
Maybe almost 25 years of experience with A.P.S.
All right.
Maybe been a supervisor, a guardianship specialist, an investigator, a regional person.
You know, that sounds just like Sonia Samples.
Doggone it. I wonder if she recognized herself.
And if we added to that someone with experience with the Harris County Sheriff's Department in Houston and experience in investigations of fraud and misconduct, an employee of the A.P.S. Region 8 with expertise in exploitation subject matter, like Virginia Quinn.
She's perfect.
That would be another great presenter.
But you know, as a lawyer, I have to say that we need a lawyer to tie all this together.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And luckily, we have with us Lisa Brown, who is a lawyer with Region 8, which extends not just to Bexar County, but to South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley. She got her, what did she get? She got her bachelor's at the University of Texas and her law degree at St. Mary's, and she has been with A.P.S. since January of 2011.
So give a warm welcome to our A.P.S. fraud team.
Sonia and I know, however, that her real job is keeping a muzzle on us. Yeah, she has to kind of, shh, don't go there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start out with a few legal definitions, tell you where we're coming from, and you know, what it is that we do really, because we're just starting sort of at the bottom, and what our authority is and where it comes from.
Okay, so since there's laws, that means it's me. So as we are the commandos, where do we get our commando powers from? Chapter 48 of the Human Resources Code. It mandates that we investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of the elderly, so 65 and over, and the disabled. Those are those who are grossly impaired in the performance of their activities of daily living. Chapter 48 also mandates that everyone report any suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation. We do have a hotline. It's the same number as the CPS number, and we'll have it at the end of the session. So it is very easy to report. There's also online reporting. And lawyers, medical professionals are required to report even if they are otherwise bound by confidentiality. It does provide immunity for cooperating with the investigation. Provides confidentiality protection for the reporter. Reporter information can only be disclosed with a court order. And it does also give us access to all those records that let us find out what's really going on in these people's lives.
And let me just add, too, that as of the last legislature, there was a little blurb in there specifically including financial institutions. So banks call us like they've been shot. Okay, as soon as they suspect something's going on, they call us, and you know, that's the right thing to do.
And by us, she means Virginia. They call her.
Yeah, they call me.
All right, so this is what we were talking about before. Who's required to report? Y'all can read that. It's anybody. Again, even if you are otherwise bound by confidentiality rules, you do need to call in any suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation.
And in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you that it's easier to go online because that form, and it's kind of obtuse, it's not really user-friendly, really. After you do it a few times, of course, you have to fill out all your name and stuff and get a password. But then the next time you report, it'll pre-populate all of that stuff so that it gets easier. So even though it's like 18 pages long, yeah, it is, I counted. Each page is only like one question, unless you have to fill something in. Oh, and it will time you out, too. So if you have a lengthy thing that you want to just you know, copy and paste, that's the best way to do that. If you have a report or something, copy and paste it, and then it won't time you out. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And it will still accept the report even if you don't fill out every single thing, as long as we get enough basic information to be going on. Obviously, the more information you can provide us, contacts, that kind of thing, the more helpful it is to us. But, you know, we're not going to not go out because you didn't put your name on the paper or something like that. All right, on to immunity. You have immunity from civil or criminal liability related to reporting the abuse or assisting with the investigation at the request of the department. Again, there is a disclaimer, so if you're acting in good faith. If you don't like your neighbor, their dog is yapping like mine does. I hate that dog. You know, I can't call A.P.S. on him and, you know, say he's disabled and can't, you know, I can't do that. But if I'm cooperating in good faith with, you know, the little ladies across the street, helping them out, then I'm protected. I can't be sued for in good faith, helping out A.P.S. and trying to determine what's going on, what kind of assistance one of our clients needs.
Okay, I'm going to just talk briefly about who is eligible for A.P.S. We don't have any kind of income eligibility. We do all area rich, poor, that it's, you have to meet our definition, which, by the way, just changed on September 1st. The person has to be age 65 or older, or between the ages of 18 and 64 with a mental or physical disability. And kind of the nuances of the new law, it went from substantially impaired to grossly impaired. So, and it took out suicide. So mental health treatment is no longer a reason in and of itself to call adult protective services. For instance, if someone is suffering from mental illness and they are receiving services through Bexar County's mental health authority is the Center for Healthcare Services. We would not investigate if that person is non-compliant with their mental health treatment. However, if that person is being abused or exploited, we would investigate that. So it's kind of nuances in the changes of the law. It used to be one or more activities of daily living, and now it's more looking at gross impairment, meaning maybe really two or more, and redefining what activities of daily living. I still encourage, if you have a suspicion, call the hotline. We will figure out if that person meets our definition. I don't want the changes in the law to discourage people from making reports, but just be aware that there have been some changes. So some of the cases we took in the past are no longer going to be investigated by A.P.S., but it's just a small portion of those cases.
And just to clarify, those changes are actually in the regulations and the rules, Texas Administrative Code. If you're wondering how we got legislative, legal changes without a legislative session, that's how we did through the rules.
Sorry, that's why the lawyer is here, to make sure I quote that right. Okay, so we have two programs in adult protective services. Most of the cases, and two cases we're going to present, is called in-home program. In other words, people living in unlicensed facilities in the community. But we have a program also, our facility investigations program, and they investigate staff members only of persons receiving the mental health or developmental disability services in any of these state-supported living centers, the state hospitals, the community centers. And again, they wouldn't necessarily investigate, say, abuse between two residents unless there was some kind of neglect on the part of the staff member who wasn't supervising that individual. So that's one of our lesser known programs. The most everybody knows about our in-home community program. So I'm going to go over, not read these verbatim, you can read, but these definitions are going to play into the cases that we're going to present. What's important about the definition of abuse as it relates to the cases we're going to present is the negligent or willful infliction and resulting physical, emotional harm or pain. That is by a caretaker, family member, or other individual who has an ongoing relationship. And for emotional abuse, physical abuse, we have to document and prove the harm that was the result. For neglect, it's a little different than the abuse. What we have to prove is it's the medical services, the goods and services to avoid physical or emotional harm or pain. So we can actually, when we investigate allegations of neglect, we're looking at risk. It doesn't necessarily have to be, say that someone didn't get their insulin. Their caregiver just decided, I'm not going to give you your insulin. If it's prescribed by a physician and we can get documented evidence that that caregiver was responsible for giving that individual their insulin, we don't have to look at, did they suffer as a result? Just the fact that they failed to give them their medications as prescribed is neglect.
And also there's something that I do called the Employee Misconduct Registry that specifically speaks to caregivers, okay? If a caregiver in the employ of a person who meets our definition is found valid for, in one of our investigations for abuse, neglect, or exploitation, then we go one more step in as much as we report them to the Employee Misconduct Registry. What that does is, because nobody wants those people, you know, to ever work in this kind of capacity again and to have access to our disabled and elder population. And so we have the whole lawyerly due process thing that we have to, you know, serve them copies of things, and they have the right to, you know, to a hearing and all that sort of thing. But if in the end the judge sides with us after hearing all the evidence and decides that yes, this person should be placed on the Employee Misconduct Registry, then that actually gets posted online. You can check the Employee Misconduct Registry. It's free. You can you know, run somebody through that, and the caregiver agencies are required to do that by law. And you can see if anybody has ever been you know, excluded from caring for someone and is listed on the Employee Misconduct Registry.
It's managed by DADS, the Department of Aging and Disability Services.
It's for professional caregivers. It's for the ones that are working with the licensed and bonded agencies. Well, if you have someone who is exploiting them, then you call me. That's what I do. Ability to be a, yeah. Unfortunately, we can't keep people from hiring people off the street. They will answer ads in papers. They will, you know, post Craigslist ads and that sort of thing, and they will hire people without knowing. You should also know, if you don't know, that anybody can pay for a criminal background check through Department of Public Safety. Did you know that? Do this if you knew that, right? No, you didn't know that. Yes, you can. Anybody who wants to pay for a criminal background check can go on to the Department of Public Safety and use their little credit card and pay for a criminal background check. So, you know, you knew what they were when you picked them up. Ma'am. On the EMR, it's any caregiver. Any caregiver. It doesn't have to be a CNA. Any caregiver who is in the employ of a provider agency, home health agency, that's who's eligible.
With the exception of the licensed professionals like registered nurses.
Right.
We don't investigate.
Right.
Like a registered nurse, that, because I believe the distinction is they're not actually an employee
right.
of the home health. So we look at more the providers.
Exactly. But in the case of licenses, we can also report to their licensing agency, which we have done. I got a CPA's license removed, for example. Okay? All right, not to hold you up.
And another change, just to mention another change from the administrative code and the rules, we now distinguish, to address your question, We distinguish between a caretaker, like a family caretaker, and a paid caretaker now. There's actually, it used to just be a caregiver was the definition, but they changed the rules, and so we distinguish between a paid caregiver and a caregiver.
Right. Okay.
And then this is Virginia's area.
This is the definition of exploitation, and you should understand that a lot of people don't, and even police. I do a lot of instruction. I teach like once a month out at the San Antonio Police Department, and I teach the Bexar County Sheriff's Department, which is where I'm going to be this afternoon, so you can hear the same talk this afternoon if you want, out at the Bexar County Sheriff's Office on exploitation. It is my challenge when I am teaching police officers to get them to understand the definition, the differences between theft and exploitation, okay? Exploitation, the illegal act or process of a caretaker, family member, or other individual who has an ongoing relationship, okay? So there's the difference. It has to be somebody who has an ongoing relationship. If it's just plain theft, that can be, you know, somebody broke into their house and burglarized their home. That's a plain old theft, and that's not what we do. Exploitation naturally implies that this has been going on for a while, that they had the trust of the senior or disabled person, and that is how they are managing to get the elder or disabled person's funds. So, and it has to, of course, be for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain. Okay, so in other words, it can't just be that they're managing their funds. For example, we had a situation of an adult daughter whose mother was sending her funds over to Jamaica because they're very persuasive individuals. These are lonely people who stay at home and they answer the phone. And once they get on a sucker list, that's exactly what it's called. You can Google this and get sucker list and they'll tell you all about it. But once they get on a sucker list, then they're on there forever and their number keeps getting generated. If they're, you know, they get these phone calls from these people in Jamaica and they'll keep sending the money. So if the daughter takes the money out and puts it in another account so that her mother can't have access to it, is it for personal benefit, profit, or gain? No, it's not. Okay, she's safeguarding the funds because she's trying to manage the mother's money. So that's the difference between, but of course, you know, a lot of times that takes an investigation to determine that. Okay, so what we were asked to do today was to try to explain a typical case or this was a very entailed case, very long case. And it started out as a single person that came to our attention, and then it sort of grew into this thing that ate Chicago. And we're having to obviously disguise the names and the circumstances because some of these instances are still in process. Some of these legal processes are still ongoing. So this was in a little community. You know, where do old people live? They live in the country, and there's lots of them out there. And so it involved an individual with relatively high profile for a small community, someone with a lot of power whom everybody knew in town, and therefore sort of passed under the radar because this was such a, you know, a well thought of individual, you know, nice family circumstances, etc., and no one thought that anything was, you know, was wrong with this individual. So he was also concurrently a very high-placed government official, and so so we kind of had a little David and Goliath thing. You know, who would say anything bad about this particular individual? Nobody. You know, nobody would dare say anything bad about this. So it was rather daunting. Because, as you can imagine, people like that have political ties. Okay? So anyway, doesn't bother us, though, does it? No, it doesn't. We're just way down here at the bottom of the totem pole. Anyway, so it came in originally, the client number one is what we're going to talk about, 85 years old. And it came in that she's living alone in this small town, and her home was in terrible condition, and you're going to see that in just a second. Her home was in terrible condition. Some of the words on the intake report were things like critters coming through holes in her floor. Okay, no air, no heat, a pot-bellied stove that she was afraid of lighting because the sparks could catch the place on fire. Okay, that's a good call. Yeah, don't light that. And so she was previously in a nursing home, but she checked herself out because she only went into the nursing home when it got really, really cold, and then she couldn't keep herself warm. So she, that's what she would do. Or if it was really, really hot in the summertime, she'd go in for 1 or 2 weeks if she needed to. Oh, thank you. See, you can tell it's a new jacket. I dressed up to come here. I did my hair too. Anyway, so yeah, see, you're not just any audience. So there were allegations of physical neglect in this original intake report, and as as our worker went out there and started talking to her, this person was quickly brought to the forefront of the investigation because he identified himself to our worker. Okay, don't worry about her. I'm large and in charge. I got this. Okay, now of course, our workers, when you hear things like that, you try to rely on that as being accurate, and you, of course, this is a very high-placed individual. It's not just somebody. Okay, and so when they tell you, I've got this, then you try to rely on that. But yeah, the case goes on. Our first, we contacted a friend who had been in the home to find out the status of the client, and we contacted the nursing service, which was supposedly visiting every week. Well, so now, here is a conundrum, because the nursing service was going every week, and they didn't see things like the condition of the home or the condition that the client was living in, because they were sort of culturally immune to that. That's the way she's lived for years, they said. Oh, you know her. That's just the way she lives. She grew up in this town. Everybody in town knew exactly who she was, exactly where she lived. She literally lived on the wrong side of the tracks, like tracks house. Okay? So nobody really kind of paid attention to her and her situation, because she got out, she went and did her grocery shopping, and, that's just the way she was. And it was like, when we saw it, it's like, oh, really? Don't tell me she's living like this. But, to the people in the town, well, that was just her house. It's the way she lived. Anyway, so this was our first visit. Our first visit, of course, we're supposed to assess the condition of the home, the environment, gather as much info as possible, and while I am there, this is my first visit to her home. While I am there, she gets a call from her caregiver, okay, from the person who identifies himself to me as her caregiver, okay? And so while she is on the phone with him, I'm like, oh, is that the man you're talking about? She said, yes. I said, I'd love to talk to him. Could I talk to him, please? She said, well, I don't know. And, she kind of hemmed and hawed, and she asked her caregiver, would it be all right if you talked to this lady from Adult Protective Services? And for some reason, there was a hesitancy there. And after a while, I managed to convince her to give me the phone. So she gives me the phone. This is the house that you can barely see from the street. It's right about 1 year ago. This is the hole in the back where the critters were coming up underneath the house. But you will see in later, let me see if I can get over here. Yeah. This right here is connected to the back porch, and that's actually new. You can tell that this is new wood, and this is the old house. But there was a lot of litter and trash, like that tackle box and the chair and that sort of thing. This is a new porch. You can see that. It's a brand new porch. It's the only thing he bought for her. The only thing that I could tell that he bought for her, because I went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Okay? So usually when we have cases of exploitation, usually what we're looking at is somebody using funds all for themselves. And there's usually a profile. I say a profile. That's a bad word to use these days. Don't do it. There's usually kind of a thing that you can expect when you have perpetrators of exploitation that kind of fit a mold. I say that they're like Playtex bras. They have no visible means of support. You know? Yeah. They lift and separate them from their funds. So, and that's a Virginia Quinn term. Don't use that. Anyway, no. My boss was like, do you really tell them that? I'm like, it's very descriptive. They understand that. But that was not the case in this instance, okay? Because he engendered a lot of confidence because of you know, his position. So this is the one thing that he bought, and that's the second thing that he bought. That's the only purchases that he made, okay, using the client funds. That right there is a water heater. That, oh, by the way, doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? No, it's got water. Actually, it does have water. No gas. That would be right. Yeah, no gas. Doesn't work. So it was great. Went ahead and installed it. Just doesn't work. Okay? So at least he perceived the need. So anyway, naturally, when I'm questioning him and I'm saying, you know, okay, so are you actually managing her funds? Oh yes. It's no problem. You know, she only lets me do little things at a time. But you will see that I improved the back porch if you go look at it, and sure enough, I did. So it sounds like, you know, he might be telling the truth. And I'm like, okay, so how long have you been involved with this lady? And what does he tell me? Years. 4 years. You know, you're making pitiful little progress here. I'm thinking, right? You're not making progress fast enough to suit me. So yeah, this is the inside of her house. Just, you know, they talk about smell-o-vision. I'd love to have smell-o-vision right now because you really can't appreciate it, what it was like in September of last year. It was pretty awful. That's just her kitchen, and of course lots and lots of debris and trash, etc. To the point where neither she nor anyone else can navigate the house, nor would you try, because of the floor. Now you understand, I am so lithe and slim that I have no problem getting anywhere. But when I would walk across this floor and I would hear these boards complaining, I thought, you know, I don't want to be on the underside of this house, so be careful where I walk. The holes in the floor everywhere. There's the stove, and you can see that the flue pipe here is loosely connected. And in a minute, I'll show you the ceiling, and you can see that, and the proximity of that to the couch. Okay, and yeah, this is her bed over here, and the floor. I don't know if you can see. This is all rotted out back here. She actually did have an air conditioner, but she didn't like to run that because, you know, the bill got high. Whatever. This was the inside of her freezer. That right there was the ice cream that I brought her. And nothing else, you know, nothing else was really edible. And you can see in just a minute from the kitchen that she couldn't have cooked it anyway. This is the living room. And she has, I say the living room, back around this corner here, you can see the light coming from the front door. This is the one room she lives in, and the kitchen that you saw is out this way, okay? So she has several TVs, and I also see by looking at her financials that, that she is being charged a cable bill, which is pretty amazing because the TVs don't work. But he was nice enough to pay for cable. Anyway. None of the clothes in the house were clean. This is her bed. You can see, yeah, who wants to lay their head in that? The grime on the cover here is so bad that you could, you know, and if you pull back the sheet, it's so bad that you could scratch your fingernail and get like stuff under your fingers. Yeah, yeah, so it's not good. This is how she told time. The battery had stopped though, so it was always 10:15 in her house. This is where she kept her canned goods. Okay, there's some canned goods here. You can also see this bottle of medication here that had been prescribed about 2 years prior. But this was a really strange thing. And Sonia, I want you to talk about her health situation there. Oh, were you? Okay, well, as long as you're going to get to that. Okay,
I will.
Good. Because
Finish
yeah,
your pictures and then I'll...
yeah, her health situation was just strange the way it happened. Anyway, so this is her bathroom. I like the whimsical toilet seat. It was very pretty. Don't get any closer to the toilet, though. No. She said that she would pour a little pine sol in there because it gets a little stanky. That's what she said. Gets a little stanky. So you can see by the conditions here of her bathtub that she hadn't had a bath in a while either. And there's her walker right there, which she doesn't use. She's extremely arthritic, very, very crippled over with rheumatoid arthritis. It's very painful for her. And the way she gets around her house is by you know, leaning on the wall and the door jamb and the you know, sink and that sort of thing. She just kind of teeters from one area to the other, and that's the way she gets around her house. Actually, that was an impediment, that walker there. So you can see, though, that when they installed the hot water line, they actually connected it to the tub, so that was new. But they didn't bother to repair the floor in the process. Too much work. There's her sink, and you can see that the hot water line runs there too, you know, but yeah, no hot water. You can see also throughout the house, you see these cobwebs hanging? Like everywhere, all over, all the walls. There is an inch or more layer of dust and crud and stuff. You know, it's extremely filthy. Yeah, there were patches in the roof as well, where her brother, who was elderly, who passed away, he got up there and tried to repair some things, and he also had hired a couple of people to come out and repair things before this man took over as her caregiver. And so there were patches in the roof, but some of it still leaked, as you can tell up in here. This was all leaking because it was all mildewy. So, and the lights didn't work. That light in that bathroom there didn't work. But and the windows so grimy that you can't even see outside. Every day that I ever saw her, she was sitting out on the front porch because that's what she does. She's got no TV. She's got no, you know, nobody that visits her. She just sits on the front porch. So, now then, why we decided to seek an assessment.
So, Dr. Schillerstrom assessed Client 1 and Client 2 in the cases that we're presenting. That was my role. Virginia did what she's going to talk about shortly when we discovered fraud and exploitation. I was involved. Oh, bless you. I was involved because of the conditions of the home and her appearance. So, how I got to involving Dr. Schillerstrom was normally my role would be is to assist the staff. Virginia and I are actually consultants, but as she explained, because this case involved a high-profile government official as the alleged perpetrator, we took over the investigation. My role was once I went and I saw the home and the conditions of the home, I started calling the home health who was going out, finding out who her doctor was, finding out who her family was, who's been visiting her. What we were able to discover is that she actually was keeping her medical appointments. So I spoke to her doctor. He had heard that her living conditions weren't great, but like Virginia said, she's always lived like that, she's fine. She comes into my office, she tells me, she answers my questions. So in his opinion, she was fine, she had capacity, no problem. So I interview the home health, and again, they're going out at least once a week. That she's always lived like that. There's no problems that they see. So what everyone was doing is they were calling this person, this government official, who, as we discovered, held power of attorney. So they would call him, everything's fine. So she had been living like this for at least 4 years or probably longer. So the attitude in this community was she wanted to live this way, and it was fine that she lived this way, and it was a lifestyle choice. But in adult protective services, if what we're seeing isn't matching what the medical professionals are telling us, our policy allows us to get a second opinion. And seeing this, I decided we needed a second opinion because it didn't make any sense to me that this individual would choose to live that way, especially once Virginia's investigation found out that she actually had money, and a lot of it. So we called in Dr. Schillerstrom. Virginia and I took him to the house to see her, and we usually step back, let him go in. He sometimes has a medical student with him, and we let him do the assessment, and we keep out of it. We do drive him there. On the way to the assessment, we try to fill him in on what we've discovered, and I don't recall, Virginia, at that point, I believe we had already actually discovered client 2, if I'm correct. And
Right about that same time.
about the same time, we had discovered, Virginia had discovered that quite a bit of exploitation had been going on, a lot of fraud, going all the way back to client 1's deceased brother, who she had inherited quite a bit of land. I don't know if all y'all know or familiar, I'm sure you've seen the news with all the fracking that's going on. Well, along with the fracking, the exploitation has exploded because the value of the land in those areas has just gone up, and a lot of it is owned by elderly people. So,
As a matter of fact, here's a fact for you. 70% of the wealth in this country is controlled by people age 65 or older. Okay? So the old bank robber, Robert Sutton, the one who said, you know, when the FBI agent said, you know, well, why did you rob a bank? He said, that's where the money is. No, elderly people. That's where the money is. Okay?
So again, we took him, he did the assessment. Part of Dr. Schillerstrom's assessment is, as I think he mentioned about removal. So we wanted him to tell us, did he feel that she was in a life-threatening situation? He determined, because I did provide him with the evidence that I had been able to obtain, my interviews with the doctor, with the home health, with a lovely cousin who was coming in and sweeping and cleaning at least 3 times a week. So when I spoke to her, I said, so you sweep what, with a broom? She said, absolutely. I go in, I said, have you ever thought to maybe turn your broom upside down and take all the, because you literally couldn't see. The pictures don't do it justice how dark and dreary because of the cobwebs covering everything. And of course her response was, well, I just changed the light bulbs. Okay, somehow the cobwebs grew back that quick. So because she was going to her doctor's appointments, she was compliant with the medications, although there was years worth, somehow the nurse that was going out managed to get her to take the correct medications. So because of that, he felt that she was not in a life-threatening situation. However, he did determine she did not have the capacity to make her decisions and recommended that we pursue guardianship. Lisa's going to talk about how I got all those records that I was referring to.
Yeah, and back to the emergency order. This case is a good example of how we do have to meet our legal requirements to pull somebody out of a house. It is a very drastic step. We do need a doctor or other medical professional's opinion that the person lacks the capacity to consent to protective services and that there is an imminent threat to their life or safety. So just because we think that somebody might be better off in a situation that's, you know, clean, we think that she'd be better there, That doesn't mean that we can necessarily pull them out with an emergency order. Those are reserved solely for life-threatening situations, which is sometimes very frustrating, especially to staff who are just, you know, oh, I love my client and I want them in a safe place, but, you know, no, we do have to meet the requirements because it is such a drastic step to pull somebody out of their house involuntarily. But back to the records. How do we get all this information? When I showed up at A.P.S, my first day, Virginia comes upstairs. I'm housed up in the legal department. So she comes and gets me, and she gives me a whirlwind tour of A.P.S, and she's like, let me tell you what we can get. We can get bank records, we can get medical records, and I was like, really? Because I didn't know what I was getting into. It's a very steep learning curve, in case anyone's ever interested. But yes, it's true. We can get vast amounts of information. The code section that lets us do that is 48.154. It allows us to get medical, financial, and other records that are necessary to the performance of the agency's duties. So again, I can't go out and just get Virginia's bank records just because I'm curious. It has to be part of an investigation or part of the provision of services. I tried only once, though. Randolph Brooks said no. They knew you. So what we can get is lost. Anyway, we can get bank records. Again, with the last legislative session, our code section was actually updated so that we can get those at no cost. We're also exempt from HIPAA.
Where am I?
So we can get medical records, again, to investigate the situation to find out what's going on. And the reason that we can get all of these records and keep them in our files is because our files are confidential. Again,
One more?
you can't just say, well, I called an A.P.S report on my neighbor, I want to find out what's happened, and submit an open records request. No, it doesn't work like that. The only people who are entitled to our records are the person we're investigating. If we interview someone, they're entitled to the portion of the records that directly pertain to them. So our perpetrators, they can get the portions that relate to themselves to find out, why did we validate against them. Guardians, for a deceased client, there's certain rules. The executor, the administrator of the estate can get our records. Everyone else has to go through a court order. And there has to be a finding by the judge that the release of the records is essential to the administration of justice and that their release won't harm anyone. So before you freak out that we can get all these records, it is all confidential and only certain people are allowed to get them. But it is great. We can also look up public records. We found, the county appraisal districts are fabulous resources for us. I keep trying to tell caseworkers to look and look and look because you can find out who owns a house, are they renting. It's a great source. We also found there were some other transactions involving this official that were then called to attention because we were asking about the land records. So that came up later. Again, bank records. In addition to getting the client's records, part of what we have to prove in exploitation is that the person personally benefited from those funds they took from the client. So one of the ways we can do that is by getting the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators' bank records to see if that's where the money went. So in certain cases, when it's necessary, we can get those records as well. And again, medical records just for the person. And again, between the bank and the medical records, we can often ask about powers of attorney, durable powers of attorney, medical. We can get more information above and beyond what's in the medical records. If you've got an advance directive that the doctor has on file, that can lead us to other family members or persons who might be interested that can help us avoid a guardianship situation if it's headed that way.
And the county records official in this instance was very helpful because when I called her up for records, she said, oh, are you looking at, let me tell you about some other things. And boy, it was all public record, okay? All public record, so it's out there to see. And she started sending me these things that if I had false teeth, I'd have dropped them. Boy, and now we're very good friends. We got to be downright chummy because she told me all kinds of stuff, and I was like, wow, and provided public records, so, Great stuff and great evidence to have, you know, where this has not been his first rodeo.
And that is one of the really amazing things about this case is there were people who once we got involved, there were people who were very brave and were willing to share information with us, despite this person being such a high-profile individual. Particularly some of the people who worked with us and gave us information, it was really, they stuck their necks out and they really helped us out and they really helped us protect the clients. And it could have been very personally disastrous for them to get involved.
Well, you can imagine living in a small town with a very high-profile person, you know, sort of the David and Goliath thing, right? Okay, services. Sorry about my little...
I know this slide looks like it would be out of order because we're talking about the investigation. But the point I wanted to make here is that while Virginia was doing the exploitation investigation, I was working on, you know, we do it, it's not like it always runs consecutively. We do this investigation and then we think of services. Because of the situation she was in, my role was to set up services to protect her and keep her as safe as possible, while Virginia dealt into this extremely complicated exploitation situation. So we were able to set up Meals on Wheels so we could make sure she had at least one meal a day. She sometimes would eat them, often would not. We sent in our own provider services because I felt we do have emergency funds available that we can use on a limited basis. Even though she already had services, in my opinion, they were inadequate because of the attitude of the staff that, she's always lived that way, she's fine. So we sent in our own providers who at least kept us comfortable enough to know that she was surviving. Unfortunately, in between us, her and I visiting and taking Dr. Schillerstrom, as you can imagine, all the alarm bells went off. And oh my God, all our money's going to get cut off. In my opinion, that's the intention. So people started telling her not to trust us. It went from us being welcomed into her home, being able to take pictures, to only being able to interview her on the front porch and totally distrusting. So when that happens, you know, little red flag goes up. Someone's telling her, we're going to stick you in a nursing home, which absolutely was not our intent at all. It did end up, that's what happened, but that was not our intent. So we got provider services. I did a referral to the dad's guardianship program, whose staff is in the house back there. If you don't know them, they're awesome. And we did an emergency referral based on rapidly diminishing assets. I can do emergency referrals to their program for 2 instances. One of them is if we do an emergency order, which is removing that individual to a safe place, and for rapidly diminishing assets, which Virginia had quickly determined that her money was being exploited, and from what we were able, as you could see from the pictures, the money was obviously not being spent on her. Eventually what happened, like I said, is she had a fall. This was down the road, and she did end up in a nursing home. But that was not our intent. So the services I put in place kept her safe as possible to allow Virginia, to do the investigation.
And you should know that our staff, when we first started contracting with Dr. Schillerstrom, nobody could remember his name, so he was Dr. Schlitterbahn to us.
I've told you.
So anyway, when I took Dr. Schillerstrom down there, he's so good with them. I mean, he's just so good with them. He's very gentle and patient and kind. He really, really relates to them well. And you know, when he comes out of the house going, you know, you pretty much know what the answer is going to be. Okay, so. The exploitation investigation started out with the bank records, her bank records, showing me where transfers had happened from her bank account to the perpetrator's account, his company and his family members. Yeah, his family members. Well, you know, share the wealth. So when I started to see that, that led me to client number 2, okay, which was like kind of like pulling a thread on a tapestry. When you pull it, the whole thing sort of, you know, comes unwound. The deposits into the perpetrator's account obviously should have gone to the client, because when I told you about this land, okay, the land was actually inherited from her brother, okay? And so when her brother passed away, we're talking a lot of land, okay? We're talking like over 100 acres. And this land that used to be, a couple years ago, farmland, you know, what, $2,000, $3,000 an acre, you know? So it would have been like, you know, $200,000, $300,000 worth. No. Now is $35,000 an acre. Okay, so use your calculator, you come up with 2.5 million. Okay, yeah. So suddenly she went from being, you know, not a very popular sort of, you know, run of the mill person in the town to being very popular. You know, now all of a sudden everybody wanted to come and you know, and help her. So line forms behind me. All right. So the sale of the land was done very, very quickly. Okay, I mean like lickety-split. And you know, obviously that's the way greedy people do. You know, they'll take the first bid they can. Well, that land turned out to be sold way under market value, way under market value. That's why it sold so quickly. Okay, and so all of that is still under investigation with, you know, the powers that be. You will also understand that our policy in adult protective services, by law, we're required to notify law enforcement. Okay, so imagine how the conversation went when Sonia and I took our notification to law enforcement letter to the local law enforcement official and gave it to him. Oh, it was a bad day at Black Rock. He was like, you know, I was hoping to retire in this job. So knowing that, you know, that there were all these conflicts and the political issues and all that sort of thing, he then brought in the state attorney general's office and the Texas Rangers. So that's a good way to, you know, sort of keep an arm's length distance on things. So it quickly sort of mushroomed, this whole situation, because of the amount of the money that I saw and, you know, what was going on. So a nice thing about bank transactions is that they leave a really nice, clear crumb trail. Okay? You can clearly see where the money is going. So when you see an $8,000 transaction to the perpetrator's daughter, it's like, okay, so explain this for me. What was this for? Oh, and I ought to tell you that the daughter is 14. Well, because she wanted to gift the daughter with a birthday gift. And so that's what he thought was a reasonable amount. Capiche? That's sort of the way this whole thing went, okay? It was just one, you know, hitting your forehead moment to another. It was very bad, okay? So when we got into that, then we started seeing transactions in the perpetrator's account to this client number 2, okay? Client number 2 now then, she is 90 years old, she lives alone, and she's very chatty. Oh my goodness. She's very chatty, she wants to talk to us all the time. Matter of fact, when we go to visit her, we sit in her house, and what did you call it, Sonia? What did you call her house?
House.
The Christmas house.
The Christmas house, yes. Decorated everywhere with Christmas. Very beautiful.
She has lots and lots of figurines and dolls, and everything is Christmas. It's September, but it's Christmas in her house. Everything is Christmassy. And she keeps telling us about her husband and how her husband was a veteran in the war, and that you know, he passed away. And then she starts talking about her husband's disability and how you know, she and her husband's mother took care of him until his mother passed away. And I said, so what kind of disability did your husband have? And she said, my husband was disabled? Okay. Beam me up, Scotty. Okay, and that was sort of the way the conversation went. So as we talked to her, she allowed us to have access to, to her paperwork and such like she would any person, because, if you wanted to go talk to her, she'd let you have access to. Okay, so when we went to leave, she insisted on walking us out to the car because, that's what Southern women do. So she walked us out to the car, and then we had to walk her back to her house.
Several times.
And then she said, well, I'll just walk you to the car. No, you just stay here, sweetie. You just stay here. It was everything we could do to get her to stay there. Anyway, so we started looking at her bank records, and same kinds of things, same kinds of transactions, used it as a personal checking account, even went so far as to make donations to his favorite causes from her funds, which I thought was very philanthropic. In any case, because there were a number of things in the town that were named after him. Yeah, from his philanthropic, pursuits, because, he liked to give money away as well. He had to preserve his reputation, you understand. So, anyway, so he admitted to everything when I talked to him, and I said, now, do you think that was appropriate? And he'd hang his head and say, well, I just didn't think she'd mind. Well, of course not, because she only has 2 brain cells and 1 doesn't work right. Okay? So that was what led us into her situation. Now with her, she ended up, I'm getting ahead of myself there. All right, the next one is Sonia on services.
Oh, back to services, okay. I have it, our printout is the wrong one. The same thing that occurred when I talked about client 1 with client 2. We tried to put in provider services, the same agency that was for client 1. I did followed the same process, tried to track down family. She had none. Talked to her doctor again. Because of this individual that held power of attorney, everything was fine, client's fine, client, doesn't need anything because this wonderful individual is making decisions for her. So we sent in what services we could, and luckily our providers that were going in were there when she fell, and got her to the hospital. Unfortunately, she did have to go to a nursing home because, not only because of her falls, but as Virginia was describing, she was extremely more demented than client 1. Again, she was talking to us about her husband, and we make that comment. I asked her, so was your husband disabled during the war, thinking that, VA benefits? And that's when she looked at me and said, my husband was disabled. So right away I knew we need to get her assessed. So Dr. Schillerstrom did assess her. We did put in provider services. After the fall, she was brought to San Antonio because she did suffer a brain bleed as a result of the fall. It was pretty serious. And because our perpetrator, and I believe he was the perpetrator at the time, was medical power of attorney, this individual wanted her to go back home because I don't know if anyone can guess why he would want her to go back home.
Wanted her to go home with him.
Yeah, because it's much more expensive. It's going to deplete the funds to put her in a nursing home.
Yeah, we're talking $160 a day.
Right. So I was able to persuade him that it was in his best interest as our alleged perpetrator to allow her to be placed in a facility, which is what her attending physicians at the hospital in San Antonio were recommending. And again, I referred this case to the dad's guardianship program because there was no family and because we needed to get the power of attorney canceled. So, yes.
So he has a say until your investigation is completely over?
Well, and She can speak to the legalities, but when someone has, yeah, we can't just override a power of attorney, and Lisa will explain why.
Well, essentially, we're in a situation where until a judge says that these people don't have capacity, they legally do have the right to make decisions. That power of attorney is still legally in effect.
I meant the perpetrator.
The perpetrator, right. So the power of attorney that he holds is still in effect until a judge says no. So we generally find it as a matter of helping the clients. It's generally best to just work with people that should have a say. I think this was actually before we spoke with him, as I recall, and we were very careful to not address the exploitation allegations when we were addressing the placement issues. So I think we hadn't gotten all the way into the investigation. If he, for instance, if he was going against our advice and was going to try and take her home and check her out, then, you know, we have a different situation. We want to proceed non-judicially as often as we can. But if he had, say, refused to follow us, say, no, 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 she's going home with me, we can either look at possibly an emergency order if the doctors are saying, no, she's going to be in danger if she goes home. Or the other thing we can look at is sometimes we can get an injunction against interference with either our investigation or services. So we can actually go to court and ask the judge to rule that, say, this person can't check her out of a nursing home. So it's more limited. It doesn't necessarily take away as many of the client's rights, but it does protect them. Again, we want to do it but you know, as a matter of practicality, if we can convince him to check her into a nursing home, then obviously that's better for the client. It's less traumatic. He's not talking to her. Obviously, this is someone that she trusts. So it's less disruptive to her to have her caretaker say, oh my gosh, A.P.S. is doing all this. If we can get him to cooperate at least while the investigation's proceeding and all the judicial actions are proceeding, it makes it easier on the client, and it's best for them. Depends on how it's set up. Normally with the statutory durable power of attorney, if you don't select an option, it goes into effect immediately and endures past the incapacity. But it can be springing as well upon incapacity. It just depends on how the document's drafted. And when we're looking at whether or not we want to, sometimes we can look at it and we can say clearly, you know, Dr. Schillerstrom went out and assessed this client, and then 2 days later somebody went out and got a power of attorney. We're not going to honor that. So, you know, it's kind of a case-by-case basis as to whether we're going to work with the person, whether we're going to say no. But we try and be careful because, again, that person does legally have capacity until a judge says otherwise. Whether or not the functional reality of the situation, legally there's a different standard, so we have to abide by that. And that is how A.P.S. is largely different than C.P.S. You know, I'm housed with C.P.S. attorneys, and they can't understand, like, oh my gosh, your clients have rights, how do you deal with that? So, you know, it is definitely a different thing. We do have to be cognizant that these are adults, and they do have legal rights that we do have to respect.
And drawing parallels between the two clients, they're both extremely elderly, of course, both demented. Neither one of them with really strong support systems. Client number 2 had nobody. Her husband had passed away. Her mother-in-law had passed away. She never had any children. She had no brothers or sisters. He had no brothers or sisters. She had nobody. And this perpetrator was her lifeline, basically. So he had, you know, complete freedom to basically, you know, help himself. Client number 1 had very little client support, mainly because, you know, she was living on the poor side of the tracks and she had nothing to offer anybody. But that was about to change.
Yes, and going back to our first client, she had a wonderful day where she just had a moment of clarity. And her friend, the one that was sweeping the floor but not the ceiling, she's talking to the client, and or no, the client got a ride with the senior service, the community agency, and goes to the bank and says, I want to see my will. You know, people have been talking to her. She figures something's going on. So the bank very kindly explains to her that they don't actually have her will, and, you know, they talk to her and they send her to the person who drafted the will. So she goes and she talks to the attorney. Again, she's having a wonderful day. And he's like, oh, I don't want to get involved in this at all. Again, like our law enforcement, this is a very high-profile person who's involved in this. But he sees that something's going on, so he refers her to an attorney out of the city. So this new attorney talks to her, and, you know, obviously there's a lot of money at stake here. So what he does is he sends a demand letter to our perpetrator, which was a little bit frustrating because we were still in the middle of our investigation.
But I asked him not to interfere.
Yeah, we did. We did ask him not to interfere, but he did. He went ahead and he sent this letter and said, you know, you owe this client, you've taken tons of her money. He found out more than we had. I guess, I don't know exactly where he got all that information, but he sends the demand letter over and asks for all the records that the perpetrator has relating to the client and asks for a bunch of money back. So the perpetrator does. I don't know where he got it from, probably somebody else, but he immediately puts almost, $200,000 back into her account that week.
Upon demand.
Upon demand. Then this attorney looks through all the records. He's got tax records, and he finds all sorts of other things that are going on. Meanwhile, we're trying to get those records from him because we feel that, you know, obviously this would help our investigation. The attorney does decline to assist us in that, and so we, at that point, when somebody declines to give us records that we feel are necessary, what we have to do is weigh how necessary are they to the investigation? Is there another way to get this information? Or do we go to court and seek a court order to have them turn over the records? So what we decided was we had enough information to validate by then, so it really wasn't 100% necessary to our investigation. And we had already done the referral to dads for guardianship, so that the guardianship, if a guardian was appointed, they would be able to get those records, and that is indeed what happened. So in this particular case, although we did ask for records from this attorney, we were not able to get them. I think they did later, but at that point our investigation was closed. He did provide some information to us, and he did eventually end up getting hired by the temporary guardian to assist in some litigation, which we'll get into.
Now, the lawyers in the room, if the perpetrator writes out a check for $200,000 the same day, what does this tell you? Yeah, exactly. See, your brains work just like me.
Yeah, and our question was, where did he get that money from?
Yeah.
So,
okay, so the next one is our report to law enforcement. When, of course, we cooperate with law enforcement, but it's up to them as to how quickly they proceed, and to the county and district attorney as to whether or not they're going to prosecute any given case. In this particular instance, I went and sat in the office of the district attorney, and guess who's buddy buds with the perpetrator? That would be right. You guys need to be investigators. Yes, and so of course he recuses himself, and I'm just having people just recuse themselves left and right. You know, yeah, wait a minute, can't handle that, and everybody takes a step back. Okay, it's like you know, hot potato. Who's got the hot? No, I don't want this one. I don't want it. You don't want it. You know, they couldn't get themselves out of it fast enough. Anyway, so and of course, if at any time when we are talking with law enforcement, if they want us to recuse ourselves, to get out of it, let them do the the investigation part or do anything, then of course we have to do that. We always will take a back seat to anything law enforcement tells us to do. More often than not, we are much more of a help than a hindrance, because we can relate things like, for example, bank records. You ask any cop how to get bank records, and the first thing they tell you, subpoena. But we don't need that. And so we can be a lot more help to them than a hindrance, and provide them with a lot of the things that they need in order to go forward. Oh yes, he did. Yeah, she was asking me, didn't he basically confess to me? He did. Yeah, in about an hour and 25 minutes. Yeah, he just sort of, he was crying. Does that help? No. No, it doesn't.
You have to remember back to the introduction. Virginia was the first female captain of the Harris County Sheriff's Department. So we do interviews, she does interrogations.
Now. Miranda who? I am not a law enforcement officer anymore, I will tell you. Okay? I am not a law enforcement, I am retired. That's what the ID says. That's the operative word, retired. That means I am pulling a pension. This is my second job. Anyway, so during the course of this conversation with him, he basically tells us that things got out of hand. He really didn't mean to to take that much money. And I was like, okay, so which time? Poor Lisa is sitting in the room with me while I am questioning him, and she's all but kicking me under the desk, like, let him answer. It's pretty clear. There's not a lot that he can say.
I told Virginia the other day, we were on another case, and she was doing her same method. She will unearth every single detail. And I told her that the difference between us is I like to let them dig their 10-foot hole, and then I'll leave them there. She says, you got another couple of feet to go. Let me hand you a shovel.
I want them to dig to China. And then I'll throw the dirt in on top of them and jump up and down on the grave. I want to make sure they've told me everything. Anyway, just because they so richly deserve it, who am I to deprive them of it? Anyway, so yeah, I don't have a lot of, not a lot of sympathy, particularly when you've met and you've talked with these clients and these are your victims. Oh, you're hurting them. Yes, sir.
When your questions become, other than investigation, when they become accusatory, how often do you use the Miranda?
Well, Miranda implies a custodial situation, sir, and I'm not, I'm not acting as a ward of the state. Sir?
How do you make accusations? You're trying to get the problem and make statements that this might be somewhat damning and criminal?
All right, sir.
You might do that.
That's why she was in the room with me.
Yeah, and I will say Virginia is very good about asking open-ended questions and getting to the truth of the matter. Also, when we were just interviewing in an office, we're not required to do Miranda warnings because those are for custodial interrogation. So although it may be considered interrogation, clearly hanging out in a state office is not considered custody, and they are free to leave at any time.
And he drove himself to our offices, of course.
There are some cases that disagree with what you just said.
Well, what I did was basically show him records and say, okay, explain this. Okay, now tell me about this. Now what happened with this? And and that sort of thing, and just let him explain what what they were.
The only time that we're required to do Miranda is if our perpetrator has been arrested for what we're investigating and they are in jail, and we don't do the Miranda. We have a law enforcement official, and anyone can choose any alleged perpetrator, and they're told that up front, and when we send them a letter, they know what their rights are. They do not have to answer our questions. If they choose to answer our questions to defend themselves, they're told that it's going to be used for our findings and that we do reports to law enforcement. So they can choose not to cooperate. We still do our investigation regardless of who cooperates or not. And if we get the evidence, which we did, we didn't even need his interview, to be honest with you. It was all there in the bank records.
And I do. I go after every detail. I will ask detailed questions. I do that because, you know, inquiring minds want to know. You know, I want to know what the, you know, what his, I even asked him, I said, you know, why did you do this? Why did you do this? You're a well-placed individual, you're well employed, etc. And he basically, you know, told me the same thing that a lot of them say, is that it just got away from him. You know, he really didn't anticipate it going this far. And, you know, you can read between the lines there and say, you know, he didn't anticipate getting discovered.
We also notify, anytime we validate, we notify the perpetrator, and they have a right to appeal our findings. So.
That would never mature in their lifetime.
Generally, for us to investigate an exploitation, we have to have an ongoing relationship of some kind that's beyond a mere contract. So if it's just a financial planner, there's a contract relationship, then that's not necessarily something we would investigate. If it's, you know, a neighbor who's been helping them out and then sells them, you know, that's a different situation. That's an ongoing relationship. So it's, you know, it's handled on a case-by-case basis. Even if we get a call in that we don't end up investigating, we still make the referral to law enforcement. Or we advise the callers that this is not an A.P.S. investigation and they need to refer to law enforcement.
Did you hear what her question was about elders investing in things that will never mature in their lifetime, that they could never possibly get a benefit out of? Investors, I mean the financial planners, will sell them these products for personal gain because they get the commission off of them, and you know, how can that benefit the client? I will tell you that I work very closely with the state securities office, and they have law enforcement officers assigned to their office, and that is a violation. They have to piece together those cases, though. I have to know what my limitations are, and I just you know, provide as much information to them as I can in those instances. Yes, ma'am. Have I ever counted them? You know, we are very, very fortunate here in Bexar County, at least. We have the San Antonio Police Department, Sergeant Miles Earwood is over the white-collar crime division, and he has advocated for and received elder fraud investigators who do nothing but elder fraud investigations, and also Joanne Woodruff with the Elder Crimes Task Force in the Bexar County District Attorney's Office. That's all she does is elder fraud. So when we present cases to them, they know what they're looking at. They know, you know, they know what a criminal case consists of, and they go forward with it. Now then, equally, when we are talking about, you know, Medina County, or not specifically Medina County, but I mean, you know, some rural counties and such, I pretty much have to take them by the hand and sort of lead them, okay, this is the way you write the report. You know, and even so, Joanne Woodruff, just the other day I had a county attorney's office who said, you know, I just don't even know where to go with this, and I had them call Joanne Woodruff, and she was amazing. She does a lot of instruction for the community. We're just really lucky to have, you know, people here that understand fraud and how to proceed with it. So.
Have statistics on that, but you know, I'm a dinosaur with A.P.S. I can tell you that we went from nothing to since Virginia has come on board and handles and puts these cases together, just in the last 3 months, I think we've had 3 or 4 where you may have seen them on TV, where the perpetrators are arrested and currently in jail and going to be prosecuted, and that's all because she put the cases together.
All I did was pick up the pieces. They left the crumb trail. Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're working a case right now where the guy is in jail, 2.1 million, I think, where you saw the cops went in there and seized everything. Now that was Dawn McCraw with the DA's office, white collar crime. I mean, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder here with these people. They are amazing. They know what they're doing, so, you know, I take very little credit. I just, you know, point them in the right direction, and they're the sick'em dogs. They're the ones who do everything, so they do the hard work. Anyway, so let me see, what's next? The results are guardianship. That's you?
Like I said earlier, both Client 1 and Client 2 was referred to the Dad's Guardianship Program. Client 2, because there was no family and because the perpetrator, by that time he was a perpetrator, we took Dr. Schillerstrom in. She was already in the nursing home, and again, in a rural community, the physicians that I had available to me were not comfortable telling me, again, they knew what was going to come, how complicated, who the perpetrator was. They did not feel comfortable filling out the certificate of medical examination for guardianship. So I took Dr. Schillerstrom into the nursing home. He did a full assessment, and she was very, very confused and failed. So client number 2 was referred to the Dad's Guardianship Program, and they quickly became her guardian. There was no contest. There was no family who stepped forward. However, for client number 1, we did the same referral, and I kind of have lost count to how many family members have stepped forward to claim put their claim on the $2.5 million plus estate that Virginia basically has discovered that she's entitled to. I think they're in the process at this point. It's going to be a jury trial. I know Katie Whitehead earlier said she had never had one. This will be our third. The first one we won, the second one we lost, and hopefully we will win this one.
Okay, so I got to stop you here. I got to tell them about the nephew.
Well, I was going to shoot it to you, but the family members are actually getting DNA tests. That's how far this is going. They're all getting DNA tests because, God forbid, they want to be her niece and nephew. Yeah. They didn't care how she was living when we found her, but everyone loves her now.
Oh, yeah. We call it the Me Too case. Me too, me too, me too. Yeah. So I get this call from this random individual who is her nephew. Okay, and this is the way this starts out. She is his nephew. He is her nephew, and he lives in Houston. And he just, word of mouth, has sort of brought him to visit her. And he did visit her back in May sometime. And I said, okay, so you visited her in May? Yes. And I said, at that time, did you look around? Did you see the way she was living? Well, he did. He went around the outside of the house, looked in the windows. I don't know how he could see, because she wouldn't let him in the house. Go figure. She doesn't know who he is. She claims, not my nephew. I don't know who he is, right? She doesn't let him in. But he's looking in there. I said, okay, so you looked in the windows. What did you see? He said, oh, pretty rough. I said, it was, right? So did you report that? Report? Deer in headlights. Report? I said, yeah, you're required to report by law. Matter of fact, it's a Class A misdemeanor if you don't report. Oh, my. So now he's defensive, and he says, okay, now, Ms. Quinn, you're making it sound like the only reason why I love my aunt is because she inherited all that money from her brother. I said, no, sir, I did not mean to imply that. I think you'd love her no matter who she inherited the money from. I just knew I was going to get in trouble for that one. I get in trouble all the time. So anyway, yeah, DNA tests and the whole thing. This don't swim with sharks if you're going to bleed. Anyway, so where are we now? Okay.
And just as a side matter, the case did get removed from the county to the district court, just because, again, everybody knows this guy, and so it was determined to be too much for the county court, and they just removed it to the district. So they're up there now, and it's been going on and on. And I also did want to make sure that we pointed out that as far as the dad's referrals, we can only do those when we have a validation of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, when we have a finding and we believe that they lack capacity and that there are no less restrictive alternatives. So dads only takes referrals from us, only when they're validations, and also from CPS for their aging out children. So just a public service announcement to get in good grace with dads. You know, the general public cannot call in dads and get a referral and say that somebody needs a guardian. That's not what they're set up for. They're set up to protect the victims of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So again, if it's just a person who, you know, needs somebody to sign them into a nursing home, if they're not in a state of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, that's not a dad's referral. What slide am I actually on? The civil lawsuits. So we go back to dad finds a temporary guardian. It's a third-party guardian. And we go back to the attorney that our client found in her moment of clarity, the one from out of city. And so since he's already sent this demand letter and been involved, they went ahead and hired him, and they filed a civil lawsuit to attempt to recover the assets. There are lots of people working very diligently to try and recover that property that was sold, any transactions. It was much greater than the $200,000 or so that was returned initially. So that is ongoing, and it probably will be for quite a while. But so there is a private attorney that was hired by the temporary guardian to try and recover those assets. Nothing of the sort for the second client, because it was just her income that was taken. She didn't have nearly as many assets as the first client.
So the criminal investigation is pending. What has happened, as I kind of told you about in a sneak peek, is that there have been lots of other people similarly situated. Some of them have already passed away. Some of their estates have already been probated, and the families are you know, obviously they got short shrifted unknowingly. So, you know, what does that mean for future cases? Well, are you a lawyer? You tell me. You know, where does that leave these families who, you know, who should have inherited and didn't? And, you know, so there's lots of other things out there. It's the domino effect.
Yes, one of the things he was best at, our perpetrator was very good at, was the POD, the pay on death bank accounts, and making sure all those wills that he was the beneficiary.
Oh, and one of the first things he did was got the, you know, they all operate off the same script, you know? I mean, they get the wills changed, they get themselves put as beneficiary on the insurance, they get the house, they change the house over to their name. Any kinds of annuities, they get themselves payable on death for. They get, and they have a way of just, you know, worming themselves into anything that's possibly, you know, worth money. They're going to find out about, and then they put their name on it.
And Sonia was just pointing out that we actually had not mentioned, in addition to being the beneficiary of the will, this perpetrator was actually an attorney, is an attorney. So he was actually drawing up quite a few of these wills. So there's obviously bar implications as well.
Just one of the rabbit trails you mentioned was that she went in a moment of clarity. She returned to an attorney who she had an attorney-client relationship with.
It was a different one.
Who had worked for her and obviously prepared her legal documents. And you say that lawyer just recused himself. Did he provide documents? Did you repeat those?
We did obtain powers of attorney. I think we had a copy of the will, so we were able to obtain those wills. There were obviously several attorneys involved. The one that she went to was not the one who was the perpetrator. So I think her situation was a little different. I can't recall the specifics, but yes, and he was aware of the ongoing A.P.S. investigation, so he did not have to report because there was already an investigation going on. And when the second attorney, the outside attorney, contacted us, he was clearly also aware of an A.P.S. investigation. And, you know, we do also have ethical duties that if we believe that a client may need a guardianship, we do have to take steps to secure that. So again, A.P.S. involvement, they already knew that those steps were being taken. So as far as that, you know, there was some cooperation. We didn't get in everything. We didn't get tax records and all that kind of stuff. But we were able to get the documents that were essential to the investigation.
And I just wanted to give the outcome for both individuals. Again, one of them, Dad still has a pending application for permanent, but because of all the people stepping forward and the jury trial, we're not sure what's going to happen. And they are guardian for Client 2. Both Client 1 and Client 2 are doing extremely well. They're being very well cared for. Unfortunately, they are in nursing homes. That's not the ideal, but they're in much better living conditions than when we found them. And my last visit with each one of them, they were very happy, especially Client 2. As long as you give her boiled chicken, which is what she says her doctor told her she had to eat, she's in heaven. So, and it turned out that the facility that she was placed in, one of her cousins works there. This is not a person who has done the DNA to prove it. She just simply goes in and cares for the client in the nursing home. So they're both very happy.
And so you can see how unusual this is, because usually when we're talking situations of exploitation, we have the money, frittered away in, in various means, and usually we ended up with perpetrators who you can't recover anything from because they've already spent it. They've got what the crooks say, is a $100 home in this arm and a Cadillac in the other, because they've got their drugs and they misspend the funds and such. And so when there are situations like that, like a case that I worked up in East Texas was, the lady had $84,000 stolen from her by her lawnmower's girlfriend. Okay, lived across the street from her. He would come over and mow her lawn. She would give him cash. He would send, she would get the cash, give it to him. Well, she began to send him to the bank. Well, he was smart enough to know he was on parole, okay, that he shouldn't be conducting any of these bank transactions, but the same did not apply for the girlfriend. So the girlfriend comes over and she starts, ingratiating herself, and really, it's so easy to, go into a nursing home and sit down and talk with. These people are engaging, they're social, they're chatty, they're lonely, and they want somebody to talk to. And so if you will go in and talk to them, you too can get care, custody, and control of her checking account. And so she started out small, writing herself checks for caregiving, for $140 a week, and then thought, well, why stop there? And the checks got bigger and bigger. And of course, the bank, being a very small bank, not having dealt with A.P.S. before, the bank calls her up because in these larger transactions, and the checks got to be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. Okay? And, it was too slow the other way. Who wants to get ATM transactions at $1,000 a piece? Come on. How's that going to support your habit? So, when she started writing these really big hot checks, or really big checks from the client's account, the bank would call her up because they're required to do so, banking laws. So they call her up, and what do they say? They say, Mrs. Campus, this lady's here and she's passing a really large check, and is that okay? And what does she say? Oh, yes, it's fine. She was a bank customer for 45 years. And all of a sudden, in the space of a year, she's gone through, $84,000 in her account. Okay? So that's usually the kind of thing we see. Okay? That's much more usual because a lot of times you can't recover from wherever it is that took the stuff, or it's going to take some kind of a suit to recover because it's the house, or the one that was in the paper recently. I don't know if you remember that one, Jewel Hall. He was an Air Force veteran, 78 years old. Am I going on? Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. One more thing. So Jewel Hall, Air Force veteran. He goes down to Jim's. This is his way of doing it. Since his wife died, he goes down to Jim's and he has a cup of coffee. He is noticed by one of the waitresses down there, who calls her friend, her buddy, her pal, from Houston, who arrives with her luggage in the back seat. Oh yeah, I'm not making this up. Her luggage in the back seat. She goes and meets him that day, moves in with him that afternoon to be his caregiver. Yeah, right, I need to write a book. And so moves in with him to be his caregiver. 2 weeks later, they're married. And 4 days after that, he's in a nursing home. And she's starting to drain the money. Yeah, so, yeah, that's a pending case too, so. Yeah, questions, I'm sorry. Oh.
In case client number one, did the purchaser of the property have any connection to all that?
No.
Well,
Not that we know.
I did get a call from his attorney
Oh.
asking questions. So it's involved, it's gone so far beyond what our investigation is. I don't know the details, but I have had a call from his attorney saying that, you know, he was completely innocent in the transaction. I can't.
But he was a surveyor.
I'm just saying, he says his attorney contacted me and said he was completely innocent in the matter and had a question about some records we had provided. But he is involved in the lawsuit to recover that, and that's still pending, so we don't know exactly how that's going to turn out. $375?
275.
$275?
Yeah.
Two-
Yeah. Yeah. And the only people that get rich are the lawyers.
Hey now.
Well, you got to litigate it, right? You do. They're going to get anything back.
On the other hand, the attorney ad litem's have, you know, put in tons of time. We have great attorney ad litem's in all of our counties who do advocate for our clients, even our clients without money, for very piddly, sometimes county rates. So although, you know, the attorneys do make a lot of money, particularly on this case, there are many who help us out, and we are truly grateful for.
And dads, too. My heroes.
Department of Aging and Disability Services. They have several different departments, but the one that we mostly deal with is they have a guardianship program. They also regulate nursing homes and providers. And the question was, what's the ongoing relationship? And it was a power of attorney.
He was her caregiver, too.
Also, the first client, the provision of the new deck and the water heater, that shows that he took on caregiving responsibilities for her. All of the providers, nurses, whatnot, they knew to call him in an emergency. So it was pretty clear that he had taken on the caregiver role.
Yeah, and he was controlling the funds, and he was paying for the in-home services and stuff that these ladies were receiving, and paying for the doctor bills and all that sort of thing.
And I should have said when she was talking about our findings, for client one, it was, I believe, strictly exploitation, but for client two. For client one, because of the conditions of the home and the fact that he had assumed the responsibility of the home itself, we also found him valid for neglect. So it's neglect and exploitation, which carries a much bigger, I guess, offense as far as prosecution will go if we ever get to that point.
How much money was in play with client number one? How much money turned out?
I don't remember. She didn't have much left. Mostly what we found was that he was going to get her house. He had done the POD on the bank account, and and I can't speak for dads, and I'm not sure if the people in the room are the ones that actually took that particular case, but they found mineral rights. When Virginia and I were in her home, in the Christmas home, she took us and said, I don't know what to do with these, and they were checks for mineral rights. So dad's is pursuing all that.
So now we see why he's interested.
Right.
Yeah.
So she owned property we weren't aware of that has the guardianship is now, it's a person and estate guardianship.
Sir.
As a result of the change in the A.P.S law, there's certain individuals that may have new culpability, especially those individuals who have an ongoing relationship with the person. Just what kind of exposure do they have now as with this change in the law? How's that changed?
All right, so the question is, with the changes in the law, the rules, what's the change in the culpability or the standards for the caregivers with the ongoing relationship? And what we've done is ongoing relationship has still stayed the same. What we're doing now is we're differentiating between caregivers, ongoing relationship, and paid caregivers that may or may not be hired by a provider agency. So if, for instance, a family member is getting paid to watch, grandma, it's going to be a slightly higher standard. For instance, emotional verbal abuse. In order to make a finding of emotional verbal abuse for just a caretaker or somebody with an ongoing relationship, it has to be a threat that a reasonable person would find to be imminent danger, more like what we do with protective orders. Whereas with a paid caregiver, cursing, that kind of more emotional abuse that causes harm is going to be looked at. So it's a higher standard for the paid caregivers, and that will also help us focus more on the clients who actually need help, as opposed to the ones who, husband and wife are just cursing at each other all the time, and that's what they've done for 20 years, and they say, well, she hurt my feelings, he hurt my feelings, so we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the actual physical needs more.
In both of these clients, was there an original legal relationship, or was this just where this man stood in and took, was there a signed document, or what?
The
POA.
The power of attorney. It's a
Both
very
times.
small town, and he's a very prominent individual. He's an attorney, so people might go to him for some legal advice, and oh, well, you've got this, and I think just pure speculation, my guess is he gradually took on more and more and went farther and farther.
Well, following on that, what recourse is there when you make a home visit, for instance, the lady who's legally blind? The house is decently clean, but there was monies paid to her roof had fallen in, there was monies paid to repair this. The repairs have not been done. There's those huge black cobwebs like you're in the picture right there. And, when I make a notification of, well, she can't see it anyway. Absolutely, that's a crime.
It's fraud. What you're describing is fraud. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a law enforcement. Yeah. 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 You
In a
don't
s-
get old. I don't recommend it.
In a situation like that, what A.P.S. should do is deal with the neglect, but that would be fraud because you're dealing with a contractor or someone who did the work. But we may take the case because of the neglect and try to deal with that part. We would not deal with the money that was fraudulently taken from her. Well, again, it's case by case, but in client 1 and client 2, he had the legal responsibility to provide, and he had established that he was providing for their care. So that's why it was neglectful in both cases, because he was not doing that. So if they establish his power of attorney and they've, and Lisa probably would address that more. What is it called if they initiate or?
They act as agent. They assume, I could just do a power of attorney. Then I say, Ben's my power of attorney and he's my agent. He doesn't assume any liability until he actually acts as my agent. And then that's when the fiduciary and other responsibilities apply. So it's going to be whether they assume that responsibility. Did they act
There are
under
even
the power of attorney?
there are even situations though where you don't have to have it in writing. Joanne Woodruff will take a case sometimes if a person is supposed to be acting in their benefit. For example, she lets them sign on to their checking account because she wants somebody to be an emergency contact person, right? And the problem is that she gives them joint ownership and gives them a debit card. Well, when she did that, you know, she was supposed to be for emergency purposes and such. Well, that actually can be a violation of a fiduciary relationship. And in isolated instances, it has to be very, you know, very good documentation, and there has to be lots of supporting information to that effect. But if the person violated that fiduciary relationship, then, you know, that can also be pursued criminally.
And that is, you know, one of the interesting things about the work we do is we do get, you know, every time you think you've seen it all, Sonia's still seeing new things. I see them every day because I'm so new. She saw something new yesterday in Gonzales. So, you know, it's something new every day, and there's no way we can ever predict how a certain situation will turn out. What we can say is we do our best and we try and look at the facts. And our main focus always has to be on the client. What are the needs, their needs? How can we best serve the client? And that's what we always strive for.
That's reported to DADS Regulatory, and they make that determination because it was the agency. We would investigate an individual provider. In this instance, it was a relationship between our perpetrator who held POA, and they were following his instructions. So we let DADS Regulatory, which is DADS Department of Aging and Disability Services. One of their entities is they license nursing homes, assisted living, home health agency, all that. So they investigate that issue. But in my opinion, that was neglectful. Anyone with any kind of professional license, you saw those pictures. That is not a situation that someone should live in, and they never reported to A.P.S.
You know, and that's my challenge too. I teach San Antonio Fire Department EMS too. So I try to get around as much as I can, but yeah. It's hard to, we had another question?
Have any interface with Social Security, with the feds, as far as, because usually these people are getting themselves named as the
Rep payee?
Their Social Security, but when you uncover this, are the feds willing to listen to you then?
Well, like Ms. Whitehead pointed out in the first presentation, that's the federals, and we're a state law. We do notify them. We actually notify them in writing, and they can do a fraud investigation. Personally, I find that Social Security is very cooperative and understand what we're doing and what type of investigation, and that we don't just arbitrarily make someone a perpetrator. So in my experience, they will go remove the person as payee if we notify them and provide evidence to them that exploitation has occurred.
Yeah, some of the people that we have, that we tend to have the most difficulty with are the really, really large banks. You know, the mega banks, the Banks of America, and I'm not going to name others. You know, but I mean, because they have subpoena processing divisions, and that's where you send your paperwork into the black hole, and then you could get a response, you hope. You know, it pays to have a good relationship with somebody on that end. Some of the entities also, because they're very, very protective about their pensioners' funds, are things like, you know, some of the pension fund agencies, you know, well, you know what they are. Anyway, and they, once a you know, for example, another one of the things that the perpetrators like to do is they like to get in there, go online, establish a debit card. Now, I will tell you that most of our clients don't even know what a computer looks like, let alone how to turn it on. Okay? But they go online, they establish a debit card, and then they start draining the funds. And at the same time, oh, by the way, what I think I'll go ahead and do is make an address change and make all the statements come to me. Okay? Because then there's no notification whatsoever. Not like a notification would help. You know, but assuming that a notification might be noticed by, oh, say a neighbor or somebody, you know, it's, don't swim alone, you know, if you're bleeding, because there's sharks in those waters. Anybody else? Okay? My stomach's growling.
Thank you very much, Lisa Brown, Virginia Quinn, and Sonia Samples. Thank you very much. Okay, my name is Joe Zapata. I am the conference coordinator, part of the planning committee, and the CE coordinator for this conference. And I got one question. Who's hungry? Yeah? Okay, lunch is going to be served in about an hour from now. Okay, let me tell you how this is going to work. We're going to exit through those two doors. You're going to go through the gauntlet of vendors and sponsors. And then you go around this corner, and there's going to be the serving table. Going to form two lines, left or the right. And you got two options after that. You can either come through these doors to sit into, come back into this auditorium and eat at your table. Or number two, you can go straight ahead into the dining room. There's going to be a dining room with drinks set and everything with a billiards table in it. So if you guys want to play against each other, I don't know. So lunch will be from 12:30 to 1:30, and I encourage you to sit next to someone who you do not know, so you can encourage some, some programming and you never know what you can sit next to. So I'll see you back in about 1 hour or so. So enjoy your lunch. Thank you.